From London, I'm John Weeks, and this is The Standard. Coming up in part 2 today, our acting culture editor Nick Clark learns all about Sotheby's major new art exhibition, London: An Artistic Crossroads. But before that, there's been a drop in the number of full-time GPs in London over the past 12 months, despite a pledge by the Conservatives to increase the number of family doctors. Figures out today show there are now 40 less than a year ago, suggesting the workload for GPs is growing as staffing levels decline, putting more pressure on surgeries and leading to longer waits for patients. In November 2019, the Conservatives committed to delivering 6,000 more GPs in England by 2024 to 25, but the latest figures show that there are only 2,464 extra doctors in local practices now, compared with December 2019. And it's something that the Lib Dems are keen to tackle. As part of their election pledges, they've announced a 5-year plan to give patients a legal right to see a GP within a week, or 24 hours if in urgent need. So, what will it take to fix the state of GP appointments in London and further afield? Joining me now is our health reporter Daniel Keane. So Dan, numbers of GPs in London are down by 40 over the last year. That doesn't sound like a lot in isolation, but what's the sort of tangible impact of that?
I think that this is part of a long-running theme. When you look back at the past 5 or 6 years, overall GP numbers have declined, and they've also failed to meet a rise in demand. One thing that a pandemic does is it hugely increases the number of kind of people with chronic issues, with respiratory problems. It essentially causes a kind of tidal wave of both short-term and long-term illness. Now, usually when that happens, primary care, GPs, is going to bear the brunt of it. And so the huge surge in illnesses and in people needing treatment, both kind of during the pandemic and after, has not been met by an increase in capacity from the GP side. So while, this figure, as you said, it's only down by 40, this is a long-term structural issue with a very important sector in the NHS. And it's going to need to be addressed because it's already filtering through to voters. People are complaining that it's taking ages to get a GP appointment, that they're struggling to get an appointment within 2 weeks. Some are waiting even more than a month. And this is something that's consistently coming up on the doorstep or even just in conversation with normal people. So it's going to definitely be among the kind of top priorities for fixing the NHS for every single party in this general election.
And speaking of the general election, we have heard from the Lib Dems today that they want to make it a legal right to be able to see a GP within a week. Based on how things are now, do you think that's a realistic thing to aim for?
I don't know precisely what they mean by a legal right, because I don't know how practices will be mandated to do this. One of the things that we hear consistently from politicians is, we're going to make the NHS do this. By force. And that kind of language sounds good on the election trail, and it makes politicians sound tough and decisive. But in practice, it doesn't always work. So I'd need to really see the fine detail here from the Lib Dems. I don't know what kind of law that would take and, what would be the punishment for practices that don't offer appointments within 7 days. And I think from what I hear, I was speaking to a GP this morning, and they said they're frustrated by consistent attempts to kind of dictate how GPs should be running their practices when surgeries have a huge variation in resources. There are some surgeries where you can get an appointment on the same day very quickly because they're well staffed, they're well run, and they've got plenty of money. There are others, particularly in rural areas, in parts of, say, the southwest of England, where there are huge staff shortages. They're working in buildings that aren't fit for purpose, and there are too many patients. And as a result, they can't deliver appointments quickly. So I don't know quite how the Lib Dems will promise to kind of deliver this across the country when there's such a patchwork of different experiences for patients.
And are Labour or the Tories offering anything in terms of GPs effectively in their sort of pre-manifestos, I guess. And how important do you think this subject is for people in London?
I think that in London, when you look at the data, funnily enough, it's actually slightly better than the rest of the country. So the latest data shows that around 9% of appointments that were booked took longer than 2 weeks, and 45% were on the same day. And this is for April. So that's actually quite good when you think about the sheer amount of people that are coming through the front door of surgeries in London. When you compare that to the Southwest, 21% took longer than 2 weeks. And funnily enough, these are the areas, the Southwest, the kind of blue wall where the Lib Dems are campaigning. So you can see why GP access is a huge issue there, perhaps less so than it might be in London. With that said, there are going to be many people in London who are waiting too long at surgeries. Only last month, we had a story about people queuing outside a GP surgery in Hilly Fields because they couldn't get through to the operator to book an appointment. So it is still an issue here. In terms of what Labour and the Tories are offering, I think that Labour certainly have got quite strong feelings on this, and they've promised the return of the family doctor, as they call it, which would allow patients to see the same GP for each appointment if they want. And if GPs deliver this, they'll be paid more. It'll be easier to book an appointment through the NHS app, which they say they're going to reform. For the Tories, they have been talking a long time about ending the 8 a.m. scramble. So that's essentially when everyone calls their GP at 8 a.m. to try and book an appointment. It's a hugely dysfunctional system. It's one of the biggest problems with the NHS, and it's one that anyone who's tried to book an appointment recently will no doubt have had issues with. And they want to digitise booking, replacing these analogue, old, ancient phones in a lot of GP surgeries with more modern systems. So I think with the Conservatives, we're still waiting on the details of a lot of their policies when it comes to primary care and also the NHS in general.
Let's take a break now. Coming up in part 2, our acting culture editor Nick Clark talks to Sotheby's deputy chairman Andre Zlattinger about their new major exhibition, London: An Artistic Crossroads.
The idea of the exhibition was to celebrate the kind of rich history of artists coming here to London and actually just to fly the flag away in a positive way for London.
Welcome back. Now, tomorrow, Saturday the 25th of May, a major new exhibition opens at Sotheby's called London: An Artistic Crossroads, with the Evening Standard as media partner. It features well-known pieces from some of the most famous artists throughout history, who passed through, settled, or were inspired by the UK and its capital city. Our acting culture editor Nick Clark spoke with Sotheby's deputy chairman Andre Zlattinger to learn more about the exhibition.
I wondered if you could tell us what was the idea behind the exhibition?
We felt it was about time we kind of celebrated London as a great kind of artistic centre. And as you know, London's always had a great long history of kind of great museums, great theatres, some of the great leading art galleries, and obviously the big auction houses here as well. Other European cities have done it recently very successfully, and we thought it was time we kind of shout about London. And London has been a great centre for artists throughout the centuries. So that was the kind of first premise. And the other idea was the National Gallery is celebrating 200 years, their bicentenary, and they're sending out 12 sort of old masters to the regions. So we thought it'd be nice to bring 12 works to London, celebrating artists. They're not British artists, but artists who came to London or moved or lived to London.
And you've got an extraordinary collection of works here. I wonder if you can talk through some of the highlights. I mean, there really are some of the biggest names from across the centuries, really.
Yeah, we've got 12 works, as I mentioned. We cover from 1621 is our earliest picture. So Marcus Geerhart's the younger portrait of Francis Howard, who was the Dutchman of Richmond and Lennox, and that's come from Compton Verney. The artist Geerhardt came to London as a young boy. He fled. He was one of the kind of Flemish Protestants who fled to England in 1560s. So that's our earliest picture. Then we've got an amazing Zoffany, who was born in Germany, came to London in 1760, and that's a portrait of Charles Townley at his library in Westminster from 1782. To the early 20th century, we've got an incredible André Durain of the Thames. This picture's come from Leeds City Art Gallery, and it probably is one of the highlights of the exhibition. I haven't seen this picture for many years, so everyone's excited to see this picture in London. Dürr, like Monet, came to London. He painted about 30 pictures between 1906 and 1907. And this is one of the kind of, the prime masterpieces from that period.
There's an amazing Bacon and a Freud and an Auerbach. I wonder if you could talk to me about those.
Yeah, we can. I mean, I think the Freud is from 1952. Freud, like Frank Auerbach, was a refugee. Freud came from Berlin to London as a young man. I think he was 10 years old, to escape the rise of Nazism. And this picture's from 1952, so it's quite an early Freud. It's really intense portrait of John Minton, the painter. And Minton actually commissioned Freud to paint this picture because he'd seen an amazing Freud of Bacon, and this picture obviously belonged to Minton, who subsequently gave it to the Royal College of Art in London. We've got a Bacon from the same year, interesting, from 1952. It's called Pope I after Velasquez, from Aberdeen City Art Gallery. It's one of their kind of masterpieces in their collection, so that's kind of the furthest loan we've got. As you probably know, I mean, Bacon was obsessed on the Pope subject. He painted for over 20 years. And this picture was exhibited with Erica Brausen at the Hanover Gallery in, I think it was 1952. And again, she was kind of one of those leading lights. He was a German refugee, great gallerist in London, great kind of, woman gallerist, kind of pioneering kind of dealer who looked after Bacon in the early years. So that's a kind of incredible highlight. And then you also mentioned we've got an Auerbach. We've got a great Auerbach. Again, Auerbach was German refugee, came on the kinder train as an 8-year-old boy, went to school in Kent. We've got a portrait of his cousin Gerda Boehm from 1965, and she sat for him for about 21 years. So incredible surface of paint. So that's an incredible loan that's come from the Sainsbury Centre in Norwich. And other great loans, we've also got an amazing Mondrian, which has come from the Tate collection, called Composition C from 1935. Mondrian, which a lot of people don't realise, came to London in 1938 to flee kind of what was happening with the Germans and invading Holland. He was persuaded by Winifred Nicholson and Ben Nicholson to come to Hampstead. This picture, interesting, was shown at the Abstract Concrete Show in 1936, which was kind of a really pioneering modernist exhibition, and then was acquired by a lady called Helen Sutherland in 1936, and she was one of the early kind of patrons of Ben Nicholson and Mondrian.
The exhibition asked the question, really, sort of London, it really attracts these creative minds and also inspires them. I imagine you've really embraced that while putting this together. I wondered if you had thought about that question and if you had any answers. What is it about London that brings these amazing minds to it and inspires them to create these masterpieces?
I mean, I think you could argue in a kind of London's always been a kind of sort of hot melting pot of, well, it's incredibly multicultural now, which is amazing, and brings great artists. There's incredible art schools here, whether it's the Slade, the Royal College of Art, Goldsmiths, and you name them. It's just phenomenal art schools. So you've always attracted great artists. But I think even, back from Hans Holbein, who was painting in the court of Henry VIII, to Rubens, to Van Dyck, to Monet, who came here, as I mentioned earlier, to Whistler, to Sickert, to Sargent, they all came to London. So hugely inspired, and I think the city continues to inspire these kind of great global artists. And I think the idea of this exhibition was to celebrate the kind of rich history of artists coming here to London, and actually just to fly the flag away in a positive way for London. As I said at the beginning, lots going on in other cities, and we've got lots to be proud of in London, and we should celebrate it more.
You mentioned the National Gallery, it's 200th year anniversary. And this, again, is another part of showing just how a great summer for art in London. There's so much going on this year.
I agree. I mean, I was saying to a friend not recently, I think we all have a responsibility in London because London is a great city of the arts. And I think, all the politicians and the mayor, they're all aware of that. We should celebrate it a lot more. And I think we as, working in the art world, whether it's museums, galleries, theatres, auction houses, we should all be joined up. And we should make sure we celebrate it much more. So the idea is this is going to be a great summer season. The exhibition's on for a whole month. It's open to the public. There's obviously lots going on in the galleries at Sotheby's as well, but this exhibition will be running from the weekend till early July.
Well, we're certainly looking forward to seeing London and Artistic Crossroads at Sotheby. Andre, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you.
Pick up the Evening Standard newspaper for more news, interviews and analysis, or head to standard.co.uk. Thanks for listening. We're back on Tuesday afternoon at 4 o'clock.